Welcome back to This Is Fine, the podcast all about navigating the complex world of government technology and cybersecurity. Today's guest is a true pioneer in government software development, Bryon Kroger. As co-founder of Kessel Run, the Department of Defense's first software factory, Bryon proved that government agencies can develop and deliver software with the speed and agility of Silicon Valley. Now, as the CEO of Rise8, he's applying those lessons to drive even greater value and innovation. Bryon is the mastermind behind DoD's first continuous authority to operate, turning a massive bottleneck with debatable security impact into a value-add daily practice. His work is all about dismantling the bureaucratic barriers that prevent agencies from delivering effective, user-focused software. We're excited to dive into what it really takes to transform government technology with someone who's not only taken on the system, but reshaped it for the better. Bryon, welcome to the show. It's great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So, you founded two transformative organizations, Kessel Run on the government side and Rise8 on the commercial side. I guess if you could start us off, and for listeners that don't know you, how did you get there? Like, what kind of brought you to Kessel Run? I think it's pretty safe to say your experience on Kessel Run really shaped your decision to start Rise8. But how did you get to Kessel Run? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I was in the Air Force, active duty, for 10 years. I started out as an intelligence officer, 14N. And for the first 7 years, I did primarily targeting operations. And as I always tell people, for all 7 years, I used really terrible software. And I saw missions fail and I saw people die because of bad software. And there was one particularly bad incident that afterwards I decided to hang up my Intel badge, cross-trained to acquisitions, and I got myself assigned to the Targeting and GEOINT program office where they acquired my terrible software. And that was literally my first day on the job. I called Defense Innovation Unit Experimental at the time, DIUX, and was introduced to Enrique Odi. And from that point, we started the commercial solutions opening process that led to the OTA, the Other Transaction Authority, that became Kessel Run. Along the way, we ended up absorbing the AOC program office. So I like to say credit where credit is due. I had two co-founders there, Enrique Odi and Colonel Jeremiah Sanders, who was the AOC program manager. But then I spent the next 3 years as the COO of Kessel Run and scaled it up to the organization it is today. It was a lot of fun, but for me, I looked at the impact that I wanted to have. If I stayed in the Air Force, first of all, they wanted to send me back to intelligence. Something we can maybe talk about is talent management in the DoD. So after doing this really incredible software thing, they're like, thanks, but you need to go do your 14N 04 leadership as a squadron commander in intelligence. And even if I had been able to stay, I looked at it as I could only go one program at a time. And leaving and starting Rise8 allowed me to tackle numerous programs across not just the Air Force, but also Space Force, other agencies. We've now expanded to Department of Veterans Affairs. So that's been super rewarding and part of the reason why I wanted to go out and start Rise8.
So I almost want to take a pause because I think I take for granted the connection between acquisition and mission. And certainly the listeners that are on the defense contracting side understand that because that's our business and we see the missions that we impact or try to impact every day. But I think a lot of soldiers don't actually understand why you would have made that jump. And I know certainly a lot of lay people that are kind of outside of the military apparatus would be like, wait, you were an intelligence officer and you went to acquisitions. And so just to kind of knit at that, because one, thank you for your service and even more especially being willing to cut your teeth on acquisitions, because that is a challenge to say the least. And I'm curious, kind of other than just if you could even just dive into that just a tiny bit, like what made you realize that the only way to fix the software was to acquire it better?
Yeah. Oh, wow. I don't know if I knew that. In fact, I was wrong in most of my assumptions about why things were broken. The naive, arrogant version of me was thinking, oh, these dumb acquisitions people, they just don't get it. And if an operator would go over there, myself, that will change everything. And I thought it was really just a lack of understanding the mission or even caring about it in some instances. I was completely wrong about that. In fact, I found people that did care a lot. All the acquisitions people cared a lot, contrary to popular belief and all of the memes that you see on LinkedIn and other social media. What I found was like a broken system, and maybe some issues with personnel, but mostly at the management layer, not at the people on the ground trying to get the job done. And so what I thought was going to be a simple matter of me just taking my operator perspective to the targeting program office and that will fix everything turned out to be like there was nothing farther from the truth. I had to learn how to hack all of the acquisitions bureaucracy to even get started. And then there's a whole bunch of things that you have to do from there. That mission context certainly helps, and the drive to care about the mission certainly helps. But like a million other things that had to be learned. And so I think a lot of people trivialize this problem and think like, oh, those people are just idiots, or they don't care, or they have the wrong incentives. And some of that is true, but I think it's a easy way to brush aside a much more complex problem.
Yeah, I would say I think that through my years of delivering on the contract side, I've kind of stopped taking positions on what's broken because it's usually any position that I would take is inevitably wrong or at least not nuanced enough to truly understand the problem, even if it like and I think it's a good point you make. There are aspects that are true. There are some people that are problems. There are some incentives that are bad. I think that it's kind of one of those situations where everybody's right and still nobody's winning.
Right.
And that's kind of the hardest problems to fix, right? When everyone can see everybody else's perspective, and yet we're all standing here staring at each other, and the job's still not meeting the mission demand. Just to kind of shift gears to talk about ATOs a little bit, or really before we even go there, let's talk about bureaucracy hacking. Because I love the term. First of all, I'm a big fan of doing it. My background, just to kind of help inform your question, is I was just a smartass developer that was willing to read policies. And so you'd get these people in the security hat that would say, you're not allowed to do that. And I would say, well, why? And I genuinely wanted to know, right? That wasn't me being a smartass yet. Where that came was when they would quote at the time a die cap control, right? Because this was before the days of RMF. And I would say, oh, well, that's interesting. And then I go read the control and be like, yeah, I'm still not seeing it, guys. Why can't I do the thing that you want me to do? And then usually the response, and to be fair to these people, was you read the control? Right, like, and then they would kind of open up and like have a discussion of like, well, this is how I've always seen it, or this is the wording of the control that's telling me to force you to do things a certain way. And then there would be a dialogue, and usually I found that if I was just persistent enough and ignorant enough of what they used to do, we would come to some medium that I could sell to my developers that I was helping to support. Because half the reason I was doing this is I used to think I was a good software engineer until I met some good software engineers. And so then I realized that if I wanted to provide value to them, I needed to do the stuff that they all hated. And God, did they hate the paperwork, and God, did they hate talking to people that just told them no. And I didn't mind. I didn't mind doing it. It felt like I was filling a need. So my question to you is bureaucracy hacking on the inside, and something that's looking at a much broader problem, because I was whacking away at this control by control, scar by scar. And sorry for people listening, I meant security control assessor representative, not like I'm not over dramatizing scars of fighting within an authorization office, but I was doing it from the bottom up, one at a time. The way I've seen you talk about bureaucracy hacking is so much more eloquent, and so much speaking to the people at the higher levels that get to make these decisions. So I'm curious, can you define bureaucracy hacking for me, and how you brought it to your acquisition responsibilities, and then ultimately to Rise8?
Yeah. So certainly there's the term predates me by a long shot. There have been a lot of people that have talked about bureaucracy hacking. The thing about it that's most powerful to me, outside of like I work in the software space, so there's an obvious tight analogy there, is I see a lot of people say they're doing bureaucracy hacking, and what they are really doing is hacky solutions. And I think that's where things tend to go wrong. Um, if you're a really good hacker, you take control of systems using the system, and you use that to an effect, to some sort of outcome that you're trying to achieve. So, and I think it's important to note, ethical hacking only here. So, we're never breaching ethics when we engage in bureaucracy hacking. Um, the goal is to take control of the system using the system, and to do so for ethical outcomes that I'm trying to achieve. And I think another important part about the analogy, of course, all analogies break down, but one thing I really love is that you can't hack a system that you don't understand. And so one aspect of me coming over and starting Kessel Run from operations that I think was important is it allowed me to be an inside outsider. I was inside the acquisition system, but I was truly an outsider to it. But that also meant that if I wanted to hack that system, I had to learn it, and I had to learn it very quickly. And so the thing I always tell people, you have to decide what your goal is. What are you trying to achieve? And the hacks you employ are to, again, take control of the system to achieve the outcome. And uh, if your goal, like you were operating at the level you were operating at as a software developer, that you were engaging in bureaucracy hacking, it's just that your outcome was a lower level outcome as it would be as a software developer. You wanted to get your app into prod, and to get your app into prod, you had to go through the die-cap process, and you figured out how to hack that system by employing it against itself. I'm going to go actually read the documentation, find out what it says I can and can't do. And what you find when you dig into RMF, Risk Management Framework for Cybersecurity, or the Federal Acquisition Regulation, is almost everything that everybody says you can't do. Not only can you do it, but it's actively encouraged. So like in the Federal Acquisition Regulation, one of my friends and mentors and somebody I really look up to, Dan Ward, he has something called the FAR Guide. You can search, I think it's the danward.org or the danward.com. But he has this FAR Guide I recommend to everybody. But one of my favorite quotes from him is that ignorance of the FAR is a greater barrier to innovation than the FAR itself. And the same thing applies to RMF. Ignorance of the RMF is a greater barrier to ATOs than the RMF itself. And a lot of times what you can do very quickly is come into a system where almost nobody actually does understand the system. They understand a bunch of local processes and policies and things that have built up around it over time, but they don't actually understand the source. And that actually makes it way easier than you might think to take control of the system. You actually don't need a ton of knowledge to hack the system. If I go back to the analogy here, normally if you're going to hack a complex system, you need a ton of knowledge and a ton of skills. You can come into these systems. It's not as overwhelming. And this is like the encouraging message, because I think we get discouraged in this space a lot. It's like, you don't need as much knowledge and insider information as you think, or connections or rank on your shoulders as you might think, to come in and take control of these systems just by understanding the bureaucracy and employing it against itself. And so the RMF says, you should build your RMF lifecycle around your software development lifecycle. So if my software development lifecycle is DevOps, I should modify my RMF lifecycle to accord or make itself one in the same with my DevOps lifecycle. Like it says I should do it. It says it right there. You're telling me that I can't do DevOps and RMF, but it says right here that I should adapt it to my software development lifecycle. And I could go on and on about like 100 different things the RMF says about employing automation to the maximum extent practical, to storing the control information and the evidence in your SDLC tools, not in like, oh, it has to be an EMAS. It doesn't say that anywhere in the RMF. There's local policy that might say that, but like I can be in full accordance with RMF and thus with the law, and do DevOps. And so we could get into a whole bunch of examples. There's a ton in the FAR as well, like employing modular contracting to the maximum extent practical. There are all of these things where you can turn the bureaucracy against itself and say, like, it specifically says I should be doing this. Are you going to specifically override that? And then if so, you can escalate very quickly. And we did that a lot.
So I first off, I really never thought to the extent to which that analogy of hacking is really applicable. And then one of my first thoughts that I wanted to bring up is, does that make living off the land, winning a contract and kind of sticking around? I just thought there was some funny hacking analogies that it can actually go pretty far before breaking down as an analogy. But before, because I do want to get into some of those examples, and one thing that popped up as you bring this up is in my brain is how important is culture to successful bureaucracy hacking. And let's take acquisition out of it, because the nerd in me wants to talk about continuous ATO and how you were able to get people to understand that that was a thing. How important, before we get into the technology of it, how important was culture among the people that you were working with and among the places you've gone in supporting people, I guess, caring enough to read those examples that you're giving, or listen to you if they're not going to read them, right? Like you're quoting things that I've read, but I'll be real, I didn't read this cover to cover. I didn't read it like a book. I read it as I needed to read it, and through time I've definitely covered it all multiple times, but I've never
Mhm.
like sat down to read 853 Rev 5 like a book. I come across the controls I need to use. I look at experts that have the patience to actually read it, and I read what they say about it, which is way better than reading it myself. And now, thanks to AI, I can force some summaries and things and some fun slang speak, which is surprisingly a really easy way to ingest the material. But to my question, right? Like, how did culture play into that for you, and where was it helpful and where was it harmful?
Yeah, culture is the most important aspect of this, and there's a lot of things that so-called innovators get wrong when they are approaching change management uh, across all facets of change management, but certainly as it relates to people and culture. I'll say a few things. A lot of folks are familiar with Conway's law, that the systems we build are a reflection of our org chart for the most part. And then we talk about inverse Conway maneuver, where we then, in order to get the desired change in the system that we want, we change the org structure. Well, similarly, there's this really great story of NUMI auto manufacturing and what I call now the NUMI maneuver. So this was an important. I don't know if this really falls into bureaucracy hacking. I think this is just like anytime you're trying to change a system, this is something that you should employ. But the short version of the story is GM and Toyota wanted to start a joint venture so that from Toyota's perspective, they wanted to enter the American market, and that was a really safe and easy way for them to enter. GM graciously gave them their worst performing plant in the United States, didn't exactly set them up for success. It was so bad, people were drinking and gambling on the job and sabotaging vehicles. I'm talking like terrible culture, right? I'm doing drugs on the job too. GM said, "Hey, Toyota will help you take on the union so that you can get new managers and employees." And Toyota said that won't be necessary. They took those people out to Toyota and put them in a working Toyota production system, brought them back to the US, to the Fremont Assembly, which was the site of NUMI. And within 3 months, it was the highest performing plant in the United States. In fact, its performance was never replicated by GM until it shuttered its doors in the 2008 auto crisis. The moral of that story is really interesting. Again, same people, 3 months later, highest performing plant in the United States. How does that happen? They had objectively awful culture. Well, the government approach to this, of course, is to give them computer-based training, CBTs, that tell them how they should think and how they should act. And we're going to tell people what to believe and what their culture should be and how they should behave, and then that will change culture. And what Japan, this is just like a part of Japanese culture, but certainly a part of Toyota and the lean manufacturing movement. They saw things very differently. They said, we'll just change the way people behave. We'll invite them to behave in a different way. And when they see the results of working in a different way, that will change their values and attitudes. That will change their culture. So they didn't give them a bunch of CBTs. Of course, they had to give them some training about how to use the assembly line and the way that they do things. But in general, their approach was just come work with us. Come sit next to me, pair with me, watch me do this. See what happens when you pull an on-done cord and stop the entire assembly line. And a manager doesn't come yell at you; they come help you. Like, what a novel thought in America. And then through seeing the results of that, that changed their values and attitudes. And then what did GM try to do to try to replicate that? Because GM was like, we've discovered a gold mine. Like, let's replicate this in all of our plants. And they would go take pictures of all the Japanese assembly lines and try to replicate it. But nothing changed because people would pull the on-down cord and they would get yelled at. So the idea there is that the NUMI maneuver that we can employ is, rather than trying to give people a bunch of agile training and give them training on CATOs, we just start working in a different way. And then we say, hey, come work with us. And like at Rise8, we use pairing. At Kessel Run, we used pairing. So like literally pair programming, but then also pair design, pair product management, pair security. And we pair one-to-one, like 40 hours a week. Hey, work with me in a different way. And when people see the results of working in a different way, it changes their values and attitudes. And so rather than telling people about how great CATO is, just show them. First, we do it. I lead. Then we do it together. We lead. And now I'm going to let you go do it yourself. You lead. I lead, we lead, you lead. Beautiful model for culture transformation. And so far, it has worked for me every time. It's been maybe like the most important secret tool in my tool belt. It's not a secret anymore.
I'll be honest, right? Like I've heard it before. It's not the first place I've seen it. I wasn't as familiar with the Toyota story. It's a really great example of it in a physical realm where people can appreciate it. I keep getting pushback when I push for pairing as, well, we can't afford pairing. Mission can't afford pairing. We don't have time for pairing. And I'm assuming your answer to that, as mine has been, is like, I don't think you can afford not to do it because what you're doing now isn't working. But I'm
Right.
curious if there's a more nuanced answer, because I've had mixed results with that, honestly.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of studies that back up the value of pair programming. I think when you get to an elite level, the Googles of the world, it starts to be a little bit less relevant. I might argue that, but we might lose that argument too. And I think the problem is people look to that and they're like, well, Google doesn't pair. So like clearly it's not the best way, but it's like, well, what do you do if you're not Google? What do you do if you're not Azure? What do you do when you have contracts that turn over every 2 or maybe 4 years? You want to talk about a great way to reduce contract transition risk? Pairing. Pair on the way out. Have a transition out CLIN where you cut down 50% of your staff on the way out, and have a transition CLIN for the inbound where they only do 50% staffing on the way in and overlap for 2 months. That's like the most unbelievable way to reduce contract transition risk. And then, if the incumbent wins, you just don't exercise those CLINs. So I could go there's like a whole bunch of examples I could use where it's particularly relevant in the DoD, especially if you're trying to do like the, blue suitor coding type programs. We have super coders, we have soldier coders at Army Software Factory. We had airman coders at Kessel Run. Turnover there is just going to be high by default. People PCS every 2 to 3 years. Another great example of how to reduce the effects of churn. Maybe the last thing that I'll say though is, that's like super high level. You get into like, okay, that's how you change behaviors. What about specific behaviors? This is a thing where I said I think innovators get a lot of things wrong. One is telling people what to do. Like you should. I just went to an agile training and I learned all about Scrum, and everybody should do Scrum because it's great, or safe, even worse. And that doesn't work, right? Change behaviors to change culture. But the second thing that then people do is like, okay, I'm going to change behaviors to change culture, Bryon. And then they show up to talk to the security people and they're like, hey, we're doing this Kubernetes thing. And Kubernetes is going to solve all of your problems. There's these things called sidecars, and they handle mutual TLS, and like it's 100% secure. And like we don't care about any of those 853 controls because we've got sidecars. And you guys are just stupid and behind the times. So like, come watch us, pair with us, you'll see. It's just a very, obviously I'm dramatizing that, but it's like a very arrogant approach in general to the actual pairing with them versus meeting people where they are and understanding their goals. And in fact, as I've done that, I found out most of the time I was wrong about the things I was arrogant about. Like I was pretty sure that RMF was stupid when I started. And now I'm like, I actually find RMF pretty valuable. I would tell anybody trying to do what we did to read 800-37 cover to cover, the overview of RMF and the guidelines for RMF. And then working with your folks. And you have to talk about the new thing in old ways. So like if I'm trying to change the requirements process, I want to make my requirements process, my build, measure, learn, lean startup kind of style. I want to make it look like waterfall acquisitions, which I know sounds counterintuitive. You're like, aren't we trying to change people? But it's like, yeah, the first step is to reduce the barrier in their mind to what we're doing. And I can just make my thing look like their thing and then say, come work with me. And I think the fatal mistake that a lot of people do is they can't even get them to come pair with an open mind because they immediately throw up this barrier of like a bunch of jargon and holier than thou. Like, I know better than you. Here's the new way. It looks nothing like your old way because your old way sucks. Those things are all, they might be true, but they're just things we don't have to say. And
Well,
so
I'd say
I
they,
try.
they definitely have diminished utility on getting somebody to want to work with you. Really good
Yeah.
tip on 837 though, because I have read that cover to cover through its releases, and it's much more approachable.
Mhm.
And I think I can kind of combine two things that you said there into a follow up question, or a bunch of things into one, because this is a culture intersection with tools, intersection with process. I won't name the agency. I was recently on an advisory call with a civilian agency that said, we want to buy a tool to do CATO. And I was my first thought was like, oh geez, where do I start, right? And
Yeah.
my first comment was like, well, is your AO bought in on this? And they were like, well, we figured we would bring the tools to the AO, and that's how we would get them to buy in. And I was like, well, for a demo, sure. Like like there are ways in which what you said could make sense, but like it feels like you're missing some organizational change, some real deep understanding of what a CATO is even trying to do, because there's just so many people that think I don't need to do ATOs anymore because I have CATO, and I'm kind of like
Yeah.
I've only been in limited environments that have used CATOs, but they're actually much harder than
Yeah.
point in time assessments and usually like sampling reviews of security controls. Like if you think about it, RMF as it's applied in most places, in my opinion, is actually quite permissive if you think about all the things that can skate by with lower cost security control assessors that don't really understand what they're assessing frequently, with a high demand on those hardworking assessors
Mhm.
that are saying, well, I can only look at 60% of controls because I got 3 assessments this month. And then you add to that the complexity of, I mean, I think IG just published a finding on this in the last year about nobody really understanding inheritance in the cloud. Some CSPs were inheriting controls that were POAM by their upstream provider. and
Yeah.
and so that's obviously just a lack of understanding of what inheritance means at a fundamental level.
Yeah.
So to the question is, how do you answer somebody? Because I think that come work with me is a great answer. Come see this. I think you've given some great answers, but so many people are looking to hack the bureaucracy with tools as opposed to an understanding of process and ways. Because by the way, the tools could be great. I'm not shitting on tools, but
Yeah.
like I've seen many tools. I've seen many people, and I'll focus on ATOs. I've seen many people try to solve how much they hate EMAS with new tools, and then I've seen 70% of those people come back a couple years later and be like, EMAS isn't that bad, right?
Mhm.
Like Archer was way harder, or CSAM was way harder, or
Yeah.
whatever. Pick your example of RMF repository, right? Or oh god, they're using SharePoint, right? Like there's a lot of people that have different opinions on that, and again, kind of like we were talking about before, they're all right. Right, that's the problem. That's actually why it's so hard, is because from their perspective, none of them are wrong. So how do you kind of bring some of the really great advice you said to the people that are trying to solve problems with tools?
Yeah. I think the first step is education. I have a one up here because I essentially I coined the term CATO at least, and was the lead behind implementing it at Kessel Run. There were people that came before us, so like we stood on the shoulders of giants. I think 18F with cloud.gov deserves a lot of credit for pioneering how this could work. They didn't quite get as far as they would have wanted to and as far as we wanted to go. So NGA kind of picked it up from them and had this ATO in a day concept. We actually deployed our first apps on NGA's platform at Kessel Run, and we took their concept, what we knew from 18F, and tried to advance it further. So as much as I say like we pioneered CATO, we were really just doing the next iteration and trying to make it a little bit better than the people before us. So I always want to give credit where credit is due, but I think as the person largely responsible for CATO as we know it today in the DoD, there's this huge education gap that is pretty hard to get past for most folks. And that's understanding that, to your point, CATO is more work, not less, than a regular ATO, and requires more discipline, more not just automation, but like business process improvement. So maybe I'll just break it down of like all the things that you need to do, at least the short version, to get a CATO, and then why a tool can't enable that. I will tell you there's not a tool on the market today. I think I do more CATOs than anybody. There's not a tool on the market today that enables CATO end to end. And I say there's not even a tool that enables a broad swath of what you need to do to get a CATO. Right now, it's still a bunch of point solutions that are pulled together, in some cases by pipeline, in some cases still by manual process to achieve a CATO. So a few things that are really important. Cloud inheritance is number one. I tell people maximizing common controls inheritance is critical to getting a CATO. Maybe I should even back up and say, I should have never named it CATO. The idea was, as I said when we started in the bureaucracy hacking stuff, is like integrating the RMF lifecycle with the DevOps lifecycle. And so what I really wanted was an ongoing authorization, which is a specific type of authorization under RMF for continuous delivery. And we didn't have a name for that, and we liked to brand things like Kessel Run, so we called it CATO because it sounded really cool. I should have maybe called it CRMF or just ongoing authorization for continuous delivery. That's a mouthful. The idea is I want an ongoing authorization. So an ongoing authorization is an ATO that doesn't expire because you've established continuous monitoring with a frequency such that you've reduced the risk to a level that the AO is willing to accept. And in lieu of an expiration date, usually you have a 3-year expiration date on an ATO. There's a renewal frequency. And we actually, again, to point to, we do more, not less, is instead of a 3-year expiration, we do quarterly renewals. Like in the CATOs that Rise8 helps customers set up, we have quarterly, basically board meetings with the AO to tell them all the dashboard metrics of like how many new systems we've onboarded, how many we've offboarded, how many CVEs we've discovered, how long it took to remediate, any major security issues. Like we give them all of the data. Say like, here's not just the risks, but like some risks realized, here were the issues, here's how we resolved them. Or are mitigating them in the future. And that level of transparency is really important. And so that's ongoing authorization. And then the second part is for continuous delivery. So my overall system has that. And I want to be able to deploy rapid updates to my apps and maybe even at some point to my platform layer, to the common services that I'm deploying to the entire enterprise. How do I do that without triggering like a new ATO review? Normally, if you went through a major revision, which most of these things would be classified as a major update, major versioning, then that would trigger a new ATO process. Well, how do we get away from that? There are actually ways under 837 to do that under an ongoing authorization, and that's what we did. Now, I said something that's important. The level of continuous monitoring required to reduce risk. If you're deploying multiple times per day, the level of continuous monitoring, people will tell me, oh, Bryon, we've always had continuous monitoring. And it's like, yeah, but you say ConMon and you're looking at maybe like a weekly or a monthly report on your system because not much changes. You get some configuration drift on your VMs, cool. Yeah, that is continuous monitoring, and it's an appropriate level of continuous monitoring for your system. If I'm only looking monthly when I'm deploying multiple times per day across multiple software teams, that is not continuous monitoring anymore. That is a huge risk. And so the level of continuous monitoring you need to establish to do a DevOps lifecycle and ship updates every day is way, way different than even a cloud-based system where you're deploying weekly. And so I think that's important to mention. Okay, so in order to enable this to go that fast, you need to maximize common controls inheritance. And not only that, but you need to track the controls at a very modular level. So you can't say, here's my AWS package. You need to start breaking down AWS services, because if I want to update an AWS service, right? AWS releases a new update. I want to be able to know the security impact, actually know it, not just write an NSI, no security impact memo. Like, I actually want to know what changed. Oh, well, that was, related to 3 hybrid controls and one specific control to that service. Okay. Now I can go to the AO and say, hey, remember, we already analyzed this. This service is responsible for these 3 hybrid controls and this one control. Here's the new update. It actually has no security impact. Okay, deploy it. Similarly, if I do the same thing at the app layer, the app is inheriting now the underlying AWS controls, which it should not be the entire AWS package. This gets people into trouble all the time with, like, Air Force Cloud One, for instance, will provide you a package that includes Oracle Cloud, Azure Cloud, like, it's all mixed into one package, which makes sense for what they were doing. But if you're trying to inherit now, you have to go down a layer and say, like, oh, well, I can't inherit like Oracle Cloud if I'm using AWS. So, like, which controls are actually coming from AWS? And specifically, if we really want to get down to it, the actual services from AWS that I'm leveraging, because I'm probably not leveraging all of them unless I was forced to by, like, some infrastructure orchestrator. And that's where we like to say you should track your controls package at the API boundary. So, like, anything I'm actually consuming is what I get to inherit. And I know I'm consuming it because I'm calling an API for it. And then that applies at not just the AWS layer, but let's just say I'll use an example that's a little bit easier. Let's say we bought a commercial PaaS provider like Red Hat OpenShift or VMware Tanzu. It's like, now I'm going to inherit controls from that, and that's inheriting controls from the infrastructure. So by the time we get up to the app layer, I'm inheriting like 80 to 90% of my controls. That allows me to update the app layer really fast, because every time I redeploy my app, it's like, okay, well, the app was only responsible for these 2 controls and these 10 hybrid controls. And here's the release notes, here's the actual change. So that common controls inheritance and making it modular, super important. No GRC platform on the market today tracks at that granular level and allows you to do what I'll call, like, modular build-a-bear type compliance that I can change on the fly. And so that's a real challenge. And then the next thing that I'll add in there, this maybe the last part I'll mention that's really important, is there's still a bunch of manual process in there. In fact, when I come to customers and they tell me I want a CATO tool or, like, solution, I tell them, first we have to do business process improvement. Once we improve the local process and get it to this normalized view that we like, then we can start digitizing some of that process. Still not automating, just digitizing. Right now I have a digitized workflow for it. Now we can start applying some automation, but you'd be surprised to the number of things you can't really automate. And so the most effective thing that you can do, in fact, when we value stream map most people's ATO processes, more than 80% of the time to get an ATO is time spent waiting in queue. And when you dig down and understand why, it's because there's, like, 100 systems per assessor, and you're just waiting in queue to get on their calendar for a review. And then they find an issue and you address it, and then you wait another 3 weeks to get back on their calendar. And so you just have these massive queues. The most effective time-saving thing you can do is not buy a new GRC platform, not hire Rise8 to come give you CATOs. It's just to hire dedicated technical assessors for your AO. So, like, if I'm a government program manager, the first thing I'm doing, I'm fencing off some of my money. It's like, oh, I've got a $20 million program. I'm going to set aside $400K for my AO to hire 2 dedicated technical assessors. That number was too low, probably like $700K. $350K ahead for, like, technical assessors would be a good starting number. And now I don't have to wait in queue. And now every time somebody checks in a user story, I do PM acceptance. And if it's security related, I do assessor acceptance in real time, or I reject it and send it back to the developer right away, so that they're not waiting a month to get feedback, right? And then trying to figure out, what did I write a month ago? I can't even remember what code I wrote a month ago or a year ago, is what we see in a lot of cases. And so that rapid feedback loop also has a secondary benefit of giving you more higher quality in your security controls. And so if you combine those 2 things, maximizing common controls inheritance and tracking it in a modular way and having dedicated technical assessors, that will get you like 90% of the way there. And then the tools will take you like the extra 5%. I think we're still 5% away from being close to perfection here. So the tool is like really marginal. Same with the CI/CD pipelines. Everybody's like, "Oh, I want a CATO pipeline." They tell me, like, yeah, that's not a thing. The pipeline can trigger a bunch of jobs, but like the jobs are where the magic happens, and most of the jobs are either humans doing work or like a bunch of digitized processes that we have to do data entry and all kinds of things still. So it's not as clean as people would expect, but what I can say for certain is we've gotten to a point where we can meet all of the RMF requirements and deploy multiple times a day. Like it is possible. You don't need special tools. You don't need an EMAS waiver. I wish I didn't have to do it in EMAS, but like you can do it in EMAS. You can do it in a spreadsheet. Like, and you can go that fast. And my advice to everybody when you're trying to change policy or bureaucracy hack is do the thing first, then ask for policy change. Everybody likes to ask. They're like, I could do that if I got policy relief or if I got a waiver. And it's like, just do the thing. And then actually what you end up learning is the policy waiver you thought you needed, you didn't need. You actually need something else. And now you know what to ask for and where to use your political favor.
There's so many things I want to summarize from those comments. So first, I'll say one of my favorite hybrid misquoted Churchill things is EMAS is the worst tool for RMF except for all of the others. So it's there's just a real lacking there. The other is that I think you hit on something that I like to say a lot, which is there's a big difference between automated and automatic. Automated, you call the digitized business process. It's not automatic. You still need a person in the loop. You're still doing a lot of data entry. And it's great to have digitized data entry. It reduces upstream problems with mistakes in data entry. It might even reduce the cost of the need of having, $700,000 for technical assessors versus 600. I think you were right also, by the way, to highlight that your first throwing out for 400 was probably too low. And that's unfortunate because that has become a problem where people are driving to the bottom on control assessment as if that's just not an important job to do. And I can tell you that I have been ordered. I'm a contractor, so I don't take orders, but I also take orders because I work for a
Me
living.
too.
And I have been ordered to misrepresent material facts to my assessors. And I'll try to get it documented as best as I can because government people like to throw out words like that's illegal, and I'm like, you're not a lawyer, that's not something you know, but it's not great. I mean, illegal or not, it's not okay. It's not
Right.
something that anyone should be comfortable with. And that's become this kind of hide the salami problem with we have this technical debt, we don't want to pay it, and we're paying homage to a process which is meant to expose debt. And then to go way back to your point of I pulled the bell on the conveyor belt and nobody yelled at me, right? Like that's just it couldn't summarize all of this really better was by except to point out that like you're supposed to point out these mistakes. Poems are supposed to be okay. Risk is okay to be accepted. It's also okay to decline some risk. That's there's a reason why these responsibilities are separate. And I think you put it just incredibly succinctly and well to say that it takes a massive amount of education, it takes investment, and it's the things that people think are easy buttons end up providing such marginal value towards the end state compared to inform people, reasonable processes, and the willingness to have a dialogue. And I think you just hit on that incredibly well with just a lot. I mean, I just had the ability to summarize it more than anything. So I really appreciate that. I have two comments here because I want to be really respectful of your time, or two questions. The first of which is how do you scale this agility at a large organization level, right? Because it seems like so many of the things that we've talked about here are just I've got to walk up to Bryon and say, let's do this together. And I've got to do this in probably, if you're a product owner, I got to do this 7 more times in a medium-sized organization. How do I do this in a large size organization? And then really closely adjunct follow-up. Are you a believer in the fact that you can't do this without having a beard? Because I noticed the beard was not incredibly pronounced. And I really think that there's this unfairness in weighing towards people in cybersecurity and DevOps with beards. And I have it because I need to lose 30 pounds. It's not a choice. But I would like to get an official comment for you on the requirement to have a beard to do this type of work.
Yeah, yeah. I only shaved my beard after I like stopped getting so involved. I had a pretty strong beard. In fact, in the early days when it was like truly just me on the ground solo, like first Rise8 employee, I had a big giant COVID beard that came down to my mid chest, and it slowly got shorter as I worked my way up the org chart. And now I don't have to have one, so it is a requirement to get credibility. No, it's not.
It's important. It's
Um,
important.
so, look, on scaling, scaling, I feel like there's this great quote I heard once about, basically scaling is really about descaling the organization. And I like thinking about it that way because I feel like we automatically assume to scale a little thing, we have to add a whole bunch of process. And really, it's just that we need to keep getting rid of process and rules and inefficiencies, and that's the way you make room for scaling things that work. Um, Now, how do you approach that? Well, you have to start with working solutions, and I think again, this is where people get wrong. They want to go ask for policy relief or go ask for permission to do this thing at scale. Like, let me take this entire program budget and start doing agile. And that's just not the way the real world works. You have to demonstrate value. So you could talk about fractal scaling or thin vertical slices, however you want to do it. But my thing is, wherever you are, like, I'm just going to make an assumption that this is a software intensive program, so not embedded. I'm just going to go with software. Uh, Pick an app or a capability. It could be an API, it could be whatever it is. And I want to just focus on continuous delivery first. So, how long does it take me to deliver a line of code? Start there and demonstrate that you can ship an app or some functionality continuously. Meaning, like, I have, if we talk about DORA metrics, the DevOps Research and Assessments Organization, they have lead time, deployment frequency, mean time to restore, change fail rate. Is like, I can hit elite level DORA metrics. Period. Start there. With one thin vertical slice of capability, and then just start focusing on what you need to descale, not adding a bunch of process and like safe and agile release trains and have all these like, you've got one software team and like 20 managers. It's wild. Like, no, that's the problem. And it's about what can you get rid of to make room for more growth. So if you think of yourself as a gardener, it's like, I'm going to water the plants and I'm going to pull the weeds. And a lot of people, what they end up doing is just like planting a bunch of weeds. And they're like, oh, well, this is how you scale in the enterprise. We have to do enterprise things. That will never work at an enterprise level. And I'm always reminded of Gall's law from Systemantics, where he says, you know, complex systems are invariably found to have evolved from simple working systems. The inverse proposition is also true, right? Um, you can never start with a complex system. It always fails. And so you always have to start over with simple working systems. And that applies to software. It applies to orgs as well. The org is a product in the same way that an app is a product. And you have to carefully design it, and it follows all the same rules of design as systems do. In fact, maybe even more pronounced, because humans are much more finicky than ones and zeros. So I think that my focus is always on, there's the famous two wolves analogy. Which wolf grows, the black wolf or the white wolf on your shoulder? It's the one that you feed. Is like, if you feed the bureaucracy, it only grows. And I think so many times people are tempted to give in to like, oh, I'll just feed the bureaucracy a little bit to give space to work over here. And you're just feeding the thing that's going to devour you. And so I like to starve the bureaucracy and feed the innovation. But doing that is to be done very carefully, because there's like 100 people that can say no and almost nobody that can say yes. And so the tool I would employ there is compassionate assertiveness. I don't have time to like dive deep into my beliefs on compassionate assertiveness, but having compassion for the people that you're working with and around. I've kind of referenced this a few times in terms of, make your thing look like their thing, like understand, empathize with them, think about their mindset. When we're approaching security assessors, it's like we practice user-centered design when we're building warfighter apps. Why don't we practice user-centered design when we're building a new assessment process? Like we do that, and that ends up being very successful, right? Because not only is that person, I'm not just hearing them, I'm hearing them and providing them a solution that's making their life better, helping them achieve their goals better. Not the goals I think they should have, but like their actual goals, like sincerely trying to help. Um, I like to refer to that as like genuine curiosity instead of consultant curiosity, right? When I'm a consultant, I'm like listening and I'm like going to try and talk you out of your opinion that I think you shouldn't have. But it's like, no, I'm going to actually help these people. And that compassion then should never be confused for lacking assertiveness about the way we need to do business. That doesn't mean that we don't take intermediary steps, but I'm always very clear, like, no, we are going to scale this. No, we are going to do that at the enterprise level. And like, we're not there today, and I have to prove to you how we're going to get there, and I have to show success along the way. But I want you to know that we are going in that direction. And just being very assertive about that and compassionate at the same time about where they're at and that they're not ready to accept that. And maybe the last tool I'll leave you with there is the diffusion of innovation of ideas curve. And one thing that gets left out of, that's famously from Jeff Moore's Crossing the Chasm. It appears in a whole bunch of other places too, but he talks about, everybody uses that as like the crossing the chasm part, but there's this thing that's often overlooked in his literature, which is you can never market to two groups at once, right? So you have your innovators, your early adopters, your early majority, your late majority. The chasm is between early adopters and early majority. But he says this thing about never marketing to two groups at once, and he said that the real chasm is actually, there's a chasm between every single one. The one I mentioned is just the most pronounced. And it's because you can't meet their expectations. If you're talking about a product, it's because your product hasn't met the next group's expectations yet. And I think what we do as an innovation community a lot of times is we expect people to change where they're at to meet us instead of changing where we're at to meet them. And if they have high expectations, for instance, if I'm building an AOC weapon system, an innovator, I can just tell them about Agile and they're like, I'm on board, sign me up, right? The early adopter is like, oh, let me see that first team go. All right, I'm ready to join team 2. Early majority is like, hey, 5 teams in. Late majority is like, I'm not buying what Bryan's saying until he builds the whole weapon system. Like, I need to see you deploy AOC weapon system to the field, full stop. It replaces all the legacy capability. Then I will believe you. And I haven't done that yet. I can't meet their expectations. So I shouldn't try to market to them. All I do is create unnecessary friction. I'm starting a conversation with a person who I know I'm going to piss off. Like, I can't meet their expectations. And so you just don't. And that would be the last thing that I would say is pay very close attention to where you are in terms of meeting people's expectations when we're talking about scaling Agile. It's like, if you're talking to somebody that's late majority and you're just getting started, that's a failing proposition. It's not even worth your time and it's not worth theirs. Just wait. But you can at the same time be compassionate and assertive about it.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say it's an interesting point about scalability because it's also kind of making sure that you're not. It's pointing out that scalability doesn't happen all at once. Every attempt and methodology that says otherwise, and I'm going to call out SAFe because it drives me nuts, is absolutely incorrect in its assertion that it will create that value. And I think that you've really taken that to an interesting level to point out that why are you talking to the people that would demand something like SAFe? Why are you talking to the people that would demand something that can't be proven? Because one, they're going to be let down eventually, right? So it's not like you can't do it so somebody else can. You can't do it, so we're going to keep doing the old way, which we all agree is also failing. But it's the way that we know that keeps the doors on and keeps the lights on, and we continue to win wars and we continue to have the most powerful currency. So as a country, we're going to keep doing it. Why would I change? So I think that's a really great approachable way to talk about scale to something that's fundamentally very difficult to approach, which is scalability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So prove you can ship one app, prove you can ship 5, prove you can turn those 5 apps into a portfolio, Prove that you can turn 5 portfolios into a complex weapon system. Now you've proven that you can scale it. And until you do all those things, you haven't proven anything. You can talk about it. You can say, well, I saw somebody else do it. I read 5 case studies, but you haven't done it. And you haven't done it specifically there for that problem. And until you do, you've got nothing. So just focus on proving it. And I think a lot of innovators think like, oh, it's already been proven. And the truth is it hasn't. And you need to be more humble and just focus every day on proving the next thing that you need to prove to get that next tranche of people to believe in you, and just keep marching your way through that diffusion of innovation curve. That's it.
It's not enough. I think another way of saying that is it's not enough to be right to be persuasive.
Right. Show
Bryon,
me.
I really want to thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation today. This was amazing. I could easily go for a whole other hour here, but I'm not going to do that to you. So thank you so much for coming. This has been great. I would love to have you back to dive into some of these topics a little bit more deeply. And for now, for our audience, this is fine with Bryon Kroger and Rise8, rise8.us. Thank you guys so much for coming on board, and really enjoyed our time together here today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.